The chickens stirred in their coop, feathers rustling like dry leaves in the dusk wind. Micah James heard it, barely a whisper against the scraping breath of the desert, but it was enough. He set down his tin cup, steam rising from what passed for coffee these days, and reached for the Winchester resting against the porch beam. The boards creaked beneath his boots as he stepped off, the sky behind him bruising into that purple twilight New Mexico wore before night. It wasn't a coyote. He'd know that sound anywhere. Coyotes didn't move careful. They didn't creep. He circled the coop slow, careful not to alert whatever had wandered too close to his starving land. Dust curled around his feet like smoke. The sun had long since beaten life out of the place. His crops gone, his mule half-blind, his soul folded in on itself like a faded letter. Then he saw her. A girl, maybe 20, crouched beside the grain sack. Her clothes were nothing but torn calico, clinging to sunburnt skin. Her arms were sticks, her hair a matted tangle that fell over a face sharp as flint. In her apron, she had scooped a handful of chicken feed. Not gold, not silver, just cracked corn and dust. She looked up, froze. Didn't drop the feed. Didn't beg. Micah raised the rifle just enough for her to see it. She blinked once, swallowed, then set the apron down slow, emptying the stolen feed like it was ashes. He didn't say a word. She stood, back straight despite the tremble in her limbs. Micah could see every rib, every fight she'd ever had carved into the hard lines of her jaw. She waited, defiant, though he could smell the fear on her like old sweat. "You hungry?" he said finally. The girl didn't answer. He lowered the rifle, thumbed the hammer back to rest, and nodded toward the porch. "Sit. I got bread. It ain't much, but it's something." She hesitated. Her eyes flicked down the road, back to the coop, then to him. Finally, she followed. He watched her sit on the far end of the porch, careful not to touch anything, like she thought even the wood might reject her. Micah went inside, came back with a heel of bread, thick and stale, and a tin cup of water. He handed both to her, then walked to the other side, sat, and stared out across the empty land. The chickens had settled again, unbothered by salvation. She ate like she hadn't in days, but not like a starving animal. She chewed slow, eyes darting between bites, always watching him. He didn't ask questions. Didn't care where she came from. Not yet. "Got a blanket, too," he said after a while. "If you want to sleep in the shed. Safer than the rocks." She didn't respond, just sipped her water. He went inside, found the old wool one, his wife's, years gone now. The kind of blanket that still carried a ghost of lilac if you buried your face deep enough. He brought it out, laid it beside her, and went back to his seat. The night came quick after that. Stars tore across the sky like old memories, bright and cold. He heard her move once, footsteps crunching toward the shed, door creaking. Then silence. Micah didn't sleep well anymore. He sat up, oil lamp glowing faint beside his chair, fingers tracing the smoothness of the rifle stock. He didn't know what kind of girl stole chicken feed. Didn't know what kind of life led her to it. But he figured it wasn't the kind that came with kindness often. Come morning, the mule brayed just before dawn. The sky peeled open in soft gray. Micah stepped outside, expecting to see nothing but empty boards where the girl had been. But she was still there, sitting in the dirt with the blanket around her shoulders, watching the chickens. He crossed his arms. "You didn't run," he said. She looked up, eyes sunken but steady. "You didn't shoot." Micah almost smiled, but not quite. "Name?" She didn't answer right away. Then Etta. No last name. No need. He nodded. "Micah." She said nothing. He handed her another piece of bread, smaller than yesterday's, and a chipped cup of coffee. She took both without a word. Ate slower this time. Micah watched her as the light grew, touching the barren fence posts and broken gate. She was skin and bones, but there was something behind her eyes that wasn't gone yet. Something flint-hard. A corner of himself he hadn't seen in a while. "You can stay," he said, surprising even himself. "If you want. Long as you don't lie and you don't steal." Etta stared at him, then looked away. "I'll feed the chickens," she said softly. Micah didn't say anything else. Just walked back to the porch, sat down, and stared into the rising day. Something had changed. He didn't know what, but he knew dust didn't settle forever, and some storms didn't make noise until they were already overhead. It wasn't long before Etta made herself part of the ranch's rhythm, as if she'd always been there, waking before dawn to feed the chickens, hauling water from the crooked pump, tending to the stubborn garden patch that never yielded more than bitter greens and hope. She spoke little, worked hard, and never once asked for more than what was given. Micah didn't question her past, and she didn't offer it. They moved around each other like wind and stone, different forces, but somehow bound to the same land. Micah hadn't realized how quiet it had been until her presence filled the gaps. It wasn't just the work she did, though she lightened his load more than he expected. It was her silence, steady and unsentimental, that made the house feel less like a tomb. She sang once. Micah heard it through the open window as she scrubbed the mule's trough. A low broken hymn. Not joyful, not sorrowful. Just there, like something ancient rising from the earth. He didn't mention it. She never sang again. One evening, as they sat on the porch sharing a supper of beans and cornbread, Etta asked, "You ever kill a man?" Micah didn't look at her. Just chewed slow and let the question hang in the dusk like the last notes of that song. "Yeah," he said. "Couple times." She nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon, where the sun bled itself out across the red sands. "I have too," she said after a long minute. Micah didn't ask why. Trouble didn't come in on a thundercloud or through a storm. It came quiet, like it always did in the high desert, on boots that didn't stir dust, in voices that didn't raise. 3 men rode in on a Wednesday, just past noon. The sun was high and mean. Micah saw them crest the hill beyond the fence, silhouettes sharp against the sky. They weren't drifters. Drifters wore their stories in their coats. These men were too clean, too quiet. Micah stood from the porch, rifle in hand but not raised. He waited. The lead rider was tall, with a hat brim low over eyes too pale for comfort. His mustache was trimmed, his boots polished. He looked like law, but rode like sin. The other 2 flanked him, a wiry one with a scar from chin to ear, and a big man with dead eyes and a busted nose that hadn't healed right. The tall one tipped his hat. "Afternoon," he said, voice smooth as creek stone. "We're looking for someone." Micah nodded once. "Aren't we all?" The rider smiled, just barely. Girl, maybe 20. Brown hair, long scar above her knee. Took something that didn't belong to her back in Santa Rosa. Micah didn't blink. "Haven't seen her." The rider looked past him, toward the coop, the shed, the mule. Then back to Micah. "Mind if we look around?" Micah shifted his stance, thumb brushing the rifle's worn stock. "I do mind." The wind died. Even the chickens stilled. The tall man's smile didn't falter, but his eyes narrowed. "Just want to be sure." "You were sure enough to ride here," Micah said. "Now you can be sure enough to ride on." The silence stretched taut. Then the man tipped his hat again, less polite this time. "Appreciate the hospitality," he said, turning his horse with a tug of the reins. "We'll be around." They rode off slow, not looking back. Micah waited until they disappeared beyond the ridge, then turned. Etta stood in the doorway, barefoot, the wool blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders, despite the heat. Her face was unreadable, but her hands shook. "You know them," Micah said. She nodded. He stepped onto the porch, rested the rifle against the beam again. "You kill one of theirs?" he asked. "No," she said, her voice a rasp. "Worse. I stole something from them they can't buy back." Micah didn't press. That night, the air was too still. Etta didn't go to the shed. She sat on the floor near the hearth, the blanket clutched around her like armor. Micah stoked the fire, though it was warm. They didn't speak. "Around midnight," she said. "They'll come back." Micah nodded. "I know. You don't owe me anything." "I don't reckon I do." Silence again. Then, so soft he almost missed it, "You should let them take me." Micah didn't turn, just stared into the fire. "They'd kill you before they got 20 feet past the gate," he said. Etta looked up, startled. "Why would you?" "Because you're here now. That's all the reason I need." She stared at him a long time, like she didn't know what kind of man he was anymore. Micah didn't explain. Didn't tell her about the boy he'd buried with his wife, or how he'd spent the last 10 years wishing something would come along worth standing for. He didn't have to. Etta saw enough in his silence. At dawn, he hitched the mule to the cart and loaded it with hay, tools, and a crate of eggs. "Head to town," he said, handing her a small pouch of coins. "Trade for supplies. Don't rush. Keep your head down." Etta narrowed her eyes. "You sending me away?" "No," he said. "I'm buying time." She hesitated, then climbed up onto the seat, hands rough against the reins. Before she could speak, Micah nodded to the trail. "Go on. I'll be here." She left without another word, dust rising behind the cart as it rolled into the hazy morning. Micah watched until she vanished. He didn't go inside. Instead, he sat on the porch, rifle across his lap, and waited. He knew those men weren't done. Knew they'd come back, and next time they wouldn't ask. But he also knew the land. Knew where the ground dipped low by the arroyo, where the rocks held echoes like secrets. He'd fought in the war. He'd survived worse odds than this with less reason to try. But this time he had won, and that made all the difference. By sundown, the chickens were quiet again. The wind picked up, hot and full of grit. Micah sat still, eyes fixed on the ridge where riders had come before. He didn't flinch when the first hoofbeats returned. They always came back, but so did justice. Sometimes it just wore a different face. The wind rose like a warning. By dusk the next day, the sky had turned a dull copper, the kind that made animals skittish and men restless. Micah could feel it in his bones, the kind of pressure that settled in deep and promised something violent. He didn't pace, didn't mutter or curse. He just sat on the edge of the porch sharpening his old skinning knife, over and over, as the horizon darkened. The rifle rested beside him, loaded and ready. A jug of water and 3 cartridges sat nearby. Nothing fancy, just enough. They came at twilight. 3 riders again, but this time they weren't trying to be polite. The lead man, same pale eyes, same clean boots, didn't bother tipping his hat. He stopped 10 yards out. Horses lined abreast like a firing line. Micah didn't stand. He didn't need to. Afraid we're past pleasantries, the pale-eyed man said. "We know she was here." "She's gone," Micah replied. "She'll be back." Micah nodded once. "Maybe." Scarface laughed under his breath, just a rasping wheeze through his broken nose. "We're not leaving empty-handed again," the leader said. Micah lifted his gaze slowly, letting silence work its weight. "You will if you want to leave at all." The leader tilted his head. "You planning to kill us, old man?" Micah's hands didn't move. "I'm planning to give you one more chance to ride away." That settled it. The leader drew first, not his pistol, but a signal. A short whistle, sharp and low. From the arroyo beyond the fence came more horses. 2, no. 3 more riders, armed and grinning. They must have circled during the day, hidden where the land cut deep and dry. 7 men now. Micah didn't move, didn't blink. He'd figured it might go this way. The tall man smiled. "You were a soldier. We know. Heard about you. You're fast. But you ain't that fast anymore." Micah exhaled through his nose. "No," he said, standing. "But I've had all day to dig my lines." He stepped off the porch and disappeared behind the water barrel. The first shot cracked from the rocks behind the barn. A flash of dust and a scream. The big man fell from his horse, belly first, bleeding into the sand. Then a second shot from the coop. Scarface's horse bucked hard as the saddle girth split. He toppled, hitting the earth with a bone-snapping thud. Screams, curses, gunfire filled the air like a summer hailstorm. The men didn't know where to aim. Every rock, every shed, every pile of scrap might have held a rifle. But there was no one. Just Micah. Just one man. He fired from the shadows of the tool shed, clipping a rider's leg. The man went down hard, dragged a foot before cutting the stirrup. He crawled behind a rain barrel and whimpered like a dog. Another tried to flank wide, galloping toward the back fence. A sharp report rang out, and his horse reared, panicked, then dropped like stone. The rider's scream echoed through the mesquite. Micah moved like water, one with the dust, using angles, shadows, the terrain itself. He had made this place his life. Now it was his weapon. In 5 minutes, it was done. 2 men dead. One bleeding from a leg. Another limping off into the brush. Only the leader remained, crouched behind a tipped trough, pale eyes wide with disbelief. His pistol shook in his hand. "You set traps," he gasped. Micah stepped into the open, rifle low. "No traps," he said. "Just the land. I know how it breathes." The man stood slowly. Blood stained his vest from a graze across the ribs. He held his gun, but it hung like doubt. "She's not worth dying for," he spat. Micah's voice turned low. "She was hungry. You would have strung her up for stealing grain." "She's a liar," he hissed. "You think she didn't tell you what she really took?" Micah stepped forward, slow. "I don't care. She burned my brother's barn down, with his boy inside it." Micah stopped. Something dark flickered in his eyes, then settled. "I believe it," he said. The man blinked. "You what?" "I believe it, because a man doesn't chase someone across 3 counties over feed. But arson? That's personal. That's pain. She murdered a child." The man growled. Micah's voice stayed even. "Or she tried to stop something worse and failed. You don't know her." "No," Micah said. "But I've seen what she is now." The man screamed and raised his pistol. Micah didn't flinch. One shot echoed over the sands. The outlaw spun, hit from behind. He crumpled, dead before he hit the dirt. Behind him stood Etta, coat flapping in the wind, the borrowed rifle still smoking in her hands. She stared at the body, not moving. Micah didn't speak. He walked over, took the rifle gently from her grip. She looked up, eyes wet and burning. "I told you to stay away," he said softly. "I went," she whispered. I couldn't leave you alone." Micah glanced back at the fallen man, the bruised ground. "You didn't," he said. They buried the bodies in the dry wash, marked with stones, but no names. The sun set heavy and red. The chickens didn't come out for 2 days. That night, inside the house, Etta finally spoke the full truth. "They kept women in that barn," she said. "Locked, used, forgotten." Micah said nothing. "One night I lit the lantern and just didn't stop pouring the oil." He nodded once. "I didn't know the boy was inside," she said, voice barely breath. "I know," Micah replied. She looked at him, waiting for judgment. None came. "You think I'm damned." Micah sipped his tea, quiet. "We all are," he said. "Just some of us keep walking anyway." Outside, the desert wind shifted. Inside, the silence no longer felt like absence. By the time spring dusted the hills with green, the farm had changed its shape. The bullet holes in the chicken coop had been patched with weathered boards, mismatched but sturdy. The graves in the dry wash were still marked with stones, though some had been disturbed by coyotes or memory. The days came warmer now, and the hens clucked without fear. Life, stubborn and quiet, had returned. Etta no longer flinched at shadows. She rose before dawn and tied her hair with an old blue ribbon. She fed the chickens, cleaned the barn, fixed the well's crank with hands calloused from more than running. She laughed now, soft and low, like someone remembering they were allowed to. Micah didn't talk much, but when he did, it meant something. She never slept in the barn again. Not after the night Micah opened the door and held out a rough-woven quilt, stitched with crooked soldier's lines. He'd made it from old shirts, scraps of uniforms, and pieces of saddlecloth. No words were spoken, just that simple offering, like peace and cloth. She'd taken it with shaking hands and slept soundly for the first time in years. One morning in early May, the preacher came riding up the road, Reverend Thorne, a circuit man with a limp and a fondness for sassafras tea. He dismounted with a groan, nodded toward Etta, and then turned to Micah with a smirk. "Well," he said, "I hear tell you've been giving a woman grain, shelter, and the Lord's own silence." Micah leaned on the fence. "You hear too much." The preacher chuckled. "Only thing louder than sin out here is forgiveness, and I hear both when your name comes up." Etta stiffened, but the preacher waved it off. "I ain't here to poke around," he said, "but I'll say this plain. If she stays, the town will talk. Talk turns to trouble. You know that." Micah nodded. She already stayed. The preacher tilted his head. So she's your ward now? Your sister? Or is this some arrangement that don't involve the Lord? Micah looked at Etta. She looked back, eyes firm, no shame, no plea. He didn't blink. She's my wife. The preacher raised a brow. Is she? Etta stepped forward. Her voice didn't waver. Yes, I am. It wasn't ceremony. There were no flowers, no rings, no guests. Just two people, a patch of dirt, and a man with a Bible. The preacher said the words. Micah said, I do, with the same gravity he once used to salute commanding officers. Etta whispered hers like a prayer. The wind shifted, as if the land itself had paused to listen. Afterward, the preacher gave them a crooked smile. There's justice, and there's mercy, he said, mounting his horse. Seems to me you two might have found a bit of both. He rode off without waiting for thanks. That night, Micah cooked stew and didn't burn it. Etta washed the dishes with humming lips. When the stars came out, she stood on the porch and stared toward the distant town lights. They'll know, she said. Eventually. Micah joined her, arms crossed, gaze steady on the horizon. Let 'em. They'll ask why you did it. I'll tell them you kept the hens alive through a dust storm and mended my socks without being asked. Etta smiled. That enough. It's more than I've ever had. Weeks passed, then months. Summer burned its way across the plains. Etta planted squash. Micah repaired the windmill. They spoke in the kind of silences people earn, not fall into companionable, deep, without weight. At night they read old books aloud. Some evenings she cried when no one spoke. He never asked why. Just passed her a cup of tea and sat closer. One sweltering morning, a boy rode out from town with a telegram. Micah opened it with care. Etta watched his face, reading nothing but stillness. What is it? He handed it over. She read it once, then again. It was a request from the county sheriff. A formal hearing in Abilene. Testimony about the gang. Justice to be pursued for the burned barn. The boy who died. The crimes left in the gang's wake. They wanted her to come forward. Her word could settle a dozen questions. Maybe more. Micah didn't tell her what to do. He just helped her pack. Etta left 2 days later. Took the mule and a jar of honey biscuits. At the gate, she turned in the saddle, eyes uncertain. What if they call me a murderer? Then tell them who you are now, Micah said. And if that don't work, tell them my name. Her breath caught, but she nodded. Then she rode out into the heat shimmer and dust, looking smaller the farther she went. Micah watched until she was gone. The farm waited. The days passed. The chickens clucked. The sky cracked with a dry storm that never quite broke. Micah sat on the porch each night, whittling. She returned on a Tuesday. Walked through the gate, like she'd just fetched a loaf of bread. Her hair was shorter. Her eyes tired but whole. They believed me, she said. He didn't smile. But he didn't need to. Later that evening, as dusk curled itself across the hills, she took off her shoes and stood barefoot in the dirt, watching the chickens peck. I didn't think I'd come back. Micah stood beside her, arms folded. I knew you would. She looked up at him, eyebrows lifted. You did. I built you a dresser. Etta laughed, the sound bubbling out in a surprised, joyful burst. I don't need a dresser, she said. You do, he said matter of fact. You've got more than a bedroll now. She looked at him then, not just at his face, but at the man beneath the years and silence. And she saw it clear. Not a savior, not a soldier, not a man who rescued her from the law. Just a man who made space, who believed enough to build a drawer. That night, she pulled the quilt tighter around her shoulders. Micah read from a tattered almanac, and then stopped mid-sentence. What is it? She asked. He looked at her. You don't have to run anymore. I know. And you don't owe me anything. I know that too. He nodded, then said, I never asked what your real name was. She smiled faintly. It doesn't matter. That name belonged to someone who needed to hide. Micah took her hand. Well, he said softly, this one's yours now. And so it was. Etta Langston, wife to a quiet man who saw beyond crime and hunger, who gave not just bread and shelter, but a name that meant peace. Out where the land still held scars, and the wind still whispered old stories, a new one had taken root. Not loud, not legendary, but lasting. And that, folks say, is where mercy met grit and stayed.